and nobody gets their questions answered, because everybody has a question. So let me answer some questions and see where that takes us. I'm doing okay. I'm 7:30 here, but I'm all right. I'll go over. Who has a question?
Will you go back to when you said, like, when you're describing your child, focusing on those three things, their ability, their skill, and their
knowledge. So it's ability, knowledge,
and
skill. But skill, ability, and knowledge are nouns, right? What are your abilities?
Right, and then the skill.
But skill is a verb.
Right.
Skillful behavior.
But you were gonna talk more about how to define that, because sometimes, like you said, it's not about the diagnosis. It's more like maybe just describing those three things. So how would you go about doing that? Because this is something that I've kind of been grappling with my little boys too, and I haven't like gotten an official diagnosis, but just like in helping people understand, I'm always kind of like
helping your in-laws understand. You mean, or helping? And at two, it's hard to talk about ability, knowledge, and skill. Right?
It really is.
So that's right.
Just kind of like,
so that's right. So there, I'm speaking in generalities, and here you say, well, what about a 2-year-old? So in a 2-year-old, I'm going to look at some very specific kinds of interpersonal behaviors.
Okay.
And much, all 2-year-olds look like they have bipolar disorder. And so, so I have a much broader range.
And bang their head on the ground, and when they throw a fit.
Some
do.
Right,
well,
but they don't all have autism, and they don't, right, so, and again, as I pointed out, some behaviors are much more powerful in predicting a negative course over time. And again, a behavior can either predict a negative course over time or a positive course over time, right? Doesn't have to predict both.
Mm-hmm.
And a behavior, absence of a behavior, can also predict a better course over time or a negative course over time. It's complicated, and maybe it's just how I think, but I didn't tell you, and I'll come back to your issue, but so I started out as an animal researcher, and I did that all the way through my master's. In fact, my master's work was looking at how certain physiological effects in rats impacted their ability to pay attention. And then I decided I liked kids better than rats, so I shifted. And I brought with me a scientific view of it, that not all children are Stepford wives. They're not all exactly the same, and they come with different temperaments. And the younger you are, the broader the range of what is normal, right? So if I want to know what your kid's going to be like at 16, I'm going to wait till he's 15 and a half, even if he's 12. That's just right. But if you want to make predictions at certain ages, I can make predictions based on certain variables, but it's a much broader prediction. It narrows down as the child gets older. And wrong information is worse than no information, and the web is full of it. I can show you a site to do an exorcism for autism. Haven't tried it yet, but there is a site. They think autism is caused by dark entities that inhabit children's bodies, and they give you instructions on how to stand by the window and do this exorcism so that the dark entity goes out the window into the neighbor's annoying kid. And he'll get it. What was that? Yeah, he'll get it. So, and I spend my career trying to separate science from non-science from nonsense. Not everything has to be double-blind, placebo proven. But if I'm going to talk to you about your 2-year-old, so I've always taken that very seriously. Because the things I say to you, I figured out that things I say to people, sometimes just casually, end up having a very big impact on what they think or how they feel. I take that very seriously. I'm very careful about what I'll say or what I won't say. And so sometimes some of my colleagues in the community, are upset because I won't tell a parent, I have a little boy now who's turning 4, who I don't think has autism. He's different. I don't think he has autism. And his parents were bombarded with, he has autism, he has autism, he has autism. And I just saw variables that I didn't think fit that, even though he has some idiosyncrasies, no doubt about it. These idiosyncrasies don't always have to occur together. All of them are test instruments, measure people against the general population. My screening tool for autism doesn't measure you against autistic kids, it measures you against the general population, because you're handicapped relative to the company you keep. The company you keep is the general world. I don't really care how similar or dissimilar you are to kids with autism. That isn't how I make the diagnosis. Does that make sense? And so, and this little boy over time, clearly it's turning out that he's not autistic. I like being right. Sometimes I'm wrong, but I'm really conservative about giving parents what are lifetime diagnoses. You don't outgrow autism. You figure out how to live with it. And so I'm very careful about, with your 2-year-old, I'm probably not going to say he has autism unless he's a poster child, and I think that his development is so delayed that I really think he's got delayed development. And in some kids with autism, I just retested a child 2 weeks ago who's 6 now, and his test scores went up dramatically, because when he was 3.5, he wasn't very interested in being tested, as I alluded to earlier. And if I would have told his parents, as a previous evaluator did, I'm sorry, but he's retarded and he has autism. That's a terrible thing to tell a parent, especially when the parent then figures out over time it's not right. And my job is to tell you what I think. Your job is to think what you want to think about your child. So if I say, he's probably got autism and this is going to be serious, your job is to say, okay, but now we're going to see, because I'm not going to give up hope because Sam said it's serious. So I'm not trying to dash your hopes. I'm just trying to give you a realistic picture of what we know. So in a 2-year-old, so if I do this with a parent of an older kid, we talk about a day in the life of the kid. And what are your child's abilities? Well, we've done some assessment and we find that he's got good simultaneous, good thinking abilities. He's got good sequencing abilities, which is why he's reading and beginning to do math and spell. His attention to detail is really poor. People think he has ADHD. But look, his planning abilities are pretty good. He's not terribly impulsive. He just doesn't pay attention to detail very well. And now let's look at his knowledge, his academic, his social, his general knowledge about the world. And then let's look at how skillful he is based on the reports you've given me, his teacher. I mean, the best way of understanding your 2-year-old would be move in your house and live there for a week. But I can't do that, so I rely on input from others to see. I mean, one of the reasons a cut point has always been 6 or 7 years of age, and it still is for conditions like ADHD, is that psychiatrists were concerned about having reports of only a single provider, having only the mother's report. Gosh, what if the mother's crazy? What if it's Munchausen by proxy? The mother's telling us all this stuff, and the kid's really normal. And so I'm not making any diagnoses until the child gets into school and we can get a report from somebody else.
Oh, so right? you wait until they're...
Well, it depends on the kid. Do I need a diagnosis?
Really significant.
Yeah, but do I need a diagnosis to help you? No.
In some states, that's the type of
but that's the threshold issue again. Do you need a diagnosis of autism to get your kid into spectrum? No, it's charter. Do you need a diagnosis of autism to get your kid into common penguin? Yes, right? But that's their choice. I can't control what they do. But when Brent Peterson was...
Insurance coverage.
Well, we'll come to that.
I'm just saying.
But when we come to Brent Peterson, who since passed away, was a pioneer in autism in this community, the only psychiatrist really looking at it, Brent would say, this kid meets enough of the criteria, he's coming to penguin. Right? So, and that's the dilemma with these diagnoses. We end up stretching them in order to try and help people. And so it skews our real understanding of incidence and prevalence. Now, insurance, that's another issue. You gotta have a diagnosis of autism to get service, right? But as one insurance screener told me when I said, I need 4 hours to play with this kid and give an ADOS and interact and have him come back twice, he's only 4, the insurance person, who was a master's level person, said, oh, that's silly. You do the diagnostic criteria. It shouldn't take you more than a half hour to ask the parents about these behaviors and make the diagnosis. Good luck. Because if we do that, half the population is going to end up with diagnosis, right? Because everybody has something, and that's what we found in the normal population. The incidence of social learning problems is like this on a bell curve. The difference is that children who receive a diagnosis of autism, even if they're mild, are still much more impaired than the normal population. Whereas kids with ADHD who receive a diagnosis, who are mild relative to other kids with ADHD, are not a whole lot more hyperactive and inattentive in the top end of the normal population. So those bell curves overlap a lot. So what I try and do is teach you to be patient, and teach you to be a good case manager and a good observer of behavior, and to not get distracted by what people say, and to be pleasant. And I use my 3P rule: be patient, pleasant, and persistent. If you want something, don't turn away from it, keep at it, because you're the only advocate for the kid, right? And if you don't know what you're advocating, so if you advocate, and the school will say, well, what do you want us to do? And you say, well, I don't know. Right, and your response is, well, I'll tell you what to do with my kid if you tell me how to keep my house clean. And they'll say, well, we don't do anything in your house. Well, I'm a parent, I don't do anything in your school. But we do that in special ed, and not in regular ed. The regular ed teacher isn't going to say, so how do you want me to teach your kid? No, it's the special ed, and I'm not picking on all special ed teachers, but the special ed program in an IEP meeting where a parent says, I want more service, and the team, out of frustration, will say, well, then tell us what to do. You shouldn't say that. Right? Okay. Other questions?
My cute daughter that was in here, one day I said to her, I don't feel like you have, and I have not studied autism that much, so it's probably a really elementary question, but I said, it doesn't seem like you have autism because you pick up on my social cues so much. She said, Mom, I pick up on it, but I feel like I have barbed wire around my mouth, and I can't illustrate.
But that may be a different problem. That's an expressive language problem.
Oh, okay.
Right? So if I asked her to do some of these nonverbal tasks where she has to look at social pictures and point out what's important, or if she could do those if she doesn't have autism. She has an expressive language problem where she can think it, but she can't say it. Right? That's different. Yeah. My goal is not to pathologize, demonize, or moralize your kid, but to have us see the world through their eyes. And I just think there's so much good information out there that's about children's development and children's behavior that gets clouded over by the holy grail of diagnosis. Why are you here? Get a diagnosis. Okay, here's your diagnosis. Goodbye. You happy? No. Why are you here? Well, I want help. Oh. Well, to get help, we first have to know what the problem is. Not what the diagnosis is, because you don't treat the diagnosis. Once I'm done with the diagnosis, I don't treat the diagnosis, I treat the impairment. Where are you impaired? Oh, you don't play with other kids. That's what I'm going to work on. Figuring out a way for you to play with other kids. What do you play? How do you play? I'm going to take things you already do or do reasonably well and try and bootstrap them. I'm not going to start with zero. So when I see kids with anxiety who are afraid of things, I can always find something they're not afraid of. And then I ask them the $64 question, why aren't you afraid of that? I'm not. Well, the last kid came in, he was afraid of that. He's not afraid of what you're afraid of. So what does that tell us about being afraid? And try to help them understand that these kinds of fears are in part driven by their biology, but in the end driven by what they think. So when you give anxious people medications that are placebos, 2/3 come back and say, I'm feeling a lot less anxious now. And a third don't, because their biology is so strong that it's a powerful time. Whereas autism, so ADHD is a problem of not thinking. You know what to do, but you don't think. Right? Depression is a problem of clouded thinking. Anxiety is a problem of clouded thinking. You can't see the world through mud-colored glasses. Right? Autism really results from an inability to appreciate what it is in front of you. So I really have to figure out a place to start, which is why it's so hard. Right? It's hard to find a place to start. So I would keep looking before I decided she had autism.
Well, it was when she got tested, we wanted her to go into a private school. Things were working, and they said she needs a diagnosis. We go up to the U, and it was interesting because it was the student evaluating.
In the ed psych department?
I think so. I'm not
In the autism program or in the education psychology?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
It was just anyway. So they said that you were not sure. We're on the brink of diagnosing her this way or that way. But because you said she likes to play along, we're diagnosing her.
Right, so what does that say? And that doesn't give you a lot of hope for the future of mental health professionals coming out of that program, does it? It's part of the reason why I'm very unhappy with that. I think it's the ed psych program. Yeah, isn't that silly? It doesn't make any sense.
Probably ought to get her evaluated.
Well,
we are loving spectrum though. She's come alive in that school.
Right, but